Our drug allows the brain to repair itself. We call it a cure. We're ready to move on to the next phase. This one.
This is wrong, Will.
This has the potential to change lives.
Some things aren't meant to be changed.
Does it work?
Like we predicted. With one exception. The drug has radically boosted brain functioning.
You mean increased intelligence?
We got a fatality. You have no idea what you're dealing with.
They're not people, you know.
Hi everyone and welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. Today we are going to be reviewing Rise of the Planet of the Apes, a movie that just came out recently. I am joined today here with Steve Ivona. Say hi, Steve.
Hey, Carlos.
Now, we both saw the film at different times, and we both seem to have a pretty good reaction to it, so we decided to kind of profile this particular film, especially since we did an episode not too long ago about the history of these films and the fact that this one was coming, and we were hoping it was going to be good. So, Steve, why don't we start with a little recap of how this film handles the subject matter of Planet of the Apes?
Okay, well, I think it's important to... I don't know if we can call it a reboot or a prequel. It seems to be a mashup of both. In the film, we're in the present day, and James Franco's character is a scientist who is developing a drug that will hopefully cure Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. And they are experimenting on chimps, which they capture in the wild. And he makes a breakthrough with the drug, but the chimp who he makes the breakthrough with is killed.
Right.
She goes on a rampage.
And they have to put her down.
And they assume that it's a side effect of the drug. But we learn later on that she had just given birth. She was in a protective mode, and she had had a baby, and they didn't find this out until she was put down.
Correct.
So rather than himself putting down the baby chimp, he decides to take it home, care for it.
Against his boss's wishes.
And at the same time, he keeps researching and experimenting on this with this drug, because his father, played by John Lithgow, also has Alzheimer's disease, and he's very passionate about coming up with some kind of a cure because he sees his father suffering. At the same time, the chimp, who is named Caesar, throwback to the original franchise, is developing at an incredible rate. His intelligence is developing. He learns sign language. He is light years ahead of anything that he's ever seen.
Right, and he was not experimented on. It's just that he got the genes from the mother. Who was experimented on.
Exactly. So, unfortunately, things go haywire. He keeps a chimp in his house, and as he gets older, Caesar starts to get curious, and he starts to feel out of place. And there's an unfortunate incident with a neighbor where he attacks him because
the unluckiest neighbor in the world.
In the world. And he attacks him and maims him, and he's taken away, and things just really kind of go downhill from there.
At that point, he submits to his boss all the results of this work that he did.
Yes.
And the boss kind of doesn't want to have anything to do with him, but then he kind of brings him back because he told him that he did actually inject his own father, which that kind of a light bulb goes off, and the guy say, "Ooh, money."
Right.
So they resume the experiments with other chimps. At the same time, Caesar's still being held in this captivity kind of place, which is it's almost like a jail, if you will.
It's not a shelter, yeah.
And then things go completely haywire.
Yes.
In terms of Caesar wants to get out of there, basically. He wants to leave, and he's starting to now form a community, and he wants to kind of advance that community
Yes.
and understands that there is something that could make them smarter like him.
Exactly.
And he finds it and delivers it, and then they all escape.
Yep.
And now we're in this bizarre
We're in the planet of
area
the apes.
where it's like, where is this going to go? And the movie takes you as far as a certain spot where it goes. It doesn't go too far.
Right.
However, the ending and then this little extra scene at the end gives you a look at going even further where they're going with this franchise if they continue.
Yes. The director has envisioned it as a trilogy. So, I mean, I think that they wanted to cut it off at a certain point and leave you hanging and leave you wanting more, which I think they did.
Oh, definitely. Let's examine the film in terms of, does it follow the structure of the classic Planet of the Apes? Now, this film is definitely not a remake of the original film. The original film is the planet. You're there
You're
at
there.
the planet. Given this film is called Rise, so you're given the backstory of how we're going to get to a certain point.
Yes.
And like you said before, it kind of takes a little bit of the third and a lot from the fourth
Yep.
film of the originals. It
Yes.
kind of meshes them up a little bit.
But it gets a little confusing. Again, you know, this is kind of geek territory. And if you want to really try and
Well, this is the perfect place for
yes, you know, if you want to talk timelines and if you want to talk continuity, and you could think of it as a remake of the fourth film to a certain extent, but it also is a prequel to the first film because of all the little nods to the first one. You have the Icarus spaceship taking off, and then you have a headline later on saying astronauts lost in space. You know, anybody who worked their salt knows that that's Charlton Heston's ship that's gone off and is now missing.
I think what they give us is a combination of winks and nods to the
Yes.
audience and potential story threads that are going to develop later.
Right.
Because, you know, just because the guy is screaming it's a madhouse, it doesn't necessarily mean that he will inspire the Charlton Heston character one day to say, no, that's just that they're winking at the
they're
audience.
just winking at the audience. You know, get your stinking paws off me and all that stuff.
So now, off the bat, biggest difference between this film and the original is the fact that we're not dealing with people in ape suits.
Oh, it's CGI.
This particular film chose the CGI route, which at first you got to kind of get used to it because we've been talking about this. CGI is not perfect yet. It gets better and better every time. And here, once you kind of get into it, once you kind of sit and get comfortable with it, then you can go with it. The opening scene of the chimp, they call them Bright Eyes, another wink at the audience, caught in the wild and being brought into, these labs. All those scenes, it looks really well done. Granted, you can hide a lot in the jungle, you can hide a lot in dark and this and that. The part when Caesar is developing and getting older and they show you this montage of him running through the house and hopping and twirling, that was a little CGI-y. There's certain body moves and twists and turns that are not very natural. And you can tell it's CGI. But like I said, once you get past that, it's okay.
Right.
The expressions, oh my God, they were made by, was it Andy Serkis?
Andy Serkis from Lord of the Rings. And King Kong.
Which there's where he has a lot of experience.
He's got the primate chops.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
But going back to the story, we're dealing with this ape that is growing up in this house and how attached he becomes to this family.
Yes.
And it's a typical story of an animal in captivity where he becomes so de-animalized, I guess, that everybody's afraid he's not going to fit in the wild.
Right.
And they show you the scene where he goes running into the woods and he's climbing through these, and he's all happy.
And he
stuff.
realizes this is where he belongs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the other interesting part is when he's in captivity in this shelter type of place, it's a jail movie.
It is, yeah.
It's, he's the new kid on the block, and there's a bad guy there that he's going to show him who's boss, and he has to beat the crap out of him and
that
trick him.
For me, the weakest part of the movie, and I love the movie, is Tom Felton Draco from Harry Potter.
I knew that guy looked familiar.
He
Damn
just
it.
overplays the heavy thing. And, maybe it's because you're so used to him as a villain. I don't know. He just needed to take it down.
He
a
was
few
over the
notches.
top.
Brian Cox, also another guy who has some geek credibility with X-Men 2 and other films that he's done. He was good. But, he was a bastard, but he wasn't like Felton, who was just ridiculous. But by the same token, maybe he needed to push Caesar that far for Caesar to get really pissed off and do what he did. I don't know.
I think what they also were trying to do was, it was a big wink to the audience. They wanted to recreate the Charlton Heston in captivity scene where the guy with the hose, and they're like really sadistic. Like they're really enjoying torturing these animals, just like in the original.
Right. But it's thrown on its head, because now
flip it around.
Right.
Let's talk also a little bit about all these Easter eggs all over the place. We talked about the It's a Madhouse line. It's very obvious. There's also a scene where Caesar, before John Lithgow gets into the fight with the neighbor, Caesar is playing with a Statue of Liberty.
Yes.
And it's like, oh my God, I'm like looking around in the theater. Is anybody getting this?
I know.
What's wrong with you people?
One of the new apes that they bring in was called Cornelia.
Cornelia, that's right.
Cornelius was the father of Caesar in the original series.
Yeah, there were so many cool little bits
Yeah,
and
they
pieces.
were. My favorites though were just the space shuttle taking off and the thought that they were lost in space.
And it's there. I mean, they show you that.
Yeah.
It's right in your face.
Yeah.
The other thing I found interesting, and I don't know if this is a theory, if it works or not, but in what we know as the Planet of the Apes society of the future, let's say, you have the orangutans are the lawyers and the science.
Yeah.
Well, not so much scientists. They're more like the law
The
people,
administrators,
the governors, and the this and that.
Right.
They're like the wise men.
Right.
The chimps are like the middle class. Some are scientists, some are workers, but they're kind of like the middle class.
Yes.
The
gorillas
are the military.
The military.
And they always kind of make fun of each other in a way where the chimps are saying that the gorillas are just a bunch of brutes and they're not very
stupid.
smart and this and that. And in this film, they establish it from the beginning. The orangutan is kind of smart, and he tells Caesar that the humans don't appreciate him because he's smart.
Right.
And they pick on him. And Caesar has become smart, so he can kind of relate to that. When Caesar releases the canisters of gas, he's trying to make them all smarter, and he does. Am I wrong? But the gorilla is not in the general population area. He's off somewhere else outside.
Yeah.
So I'm theorizing that the reason why the gorillas are never as smart as the chimps is because they never got a full dose
Maybe.
of what was...
I didn't even think about that.
They got a little bit because they were in the area, but they weren't in that general area.
But he was loyal to Caesar, that gorilla.
He got it. He got some, but not all of it.
Talk about Easter eggs. The orangutan that he would do sign language with, his name was Maurice. Maurice Evans played the orangutan scientist in the original Planet of the Apes.
Zayas?
Dr. Zayas. That was Maurice Evans. Yeah, just another one. Just wanted to point that out.
Oh, my God. I really liked the film. And it was funny because I'm watching the film and I'm like, any second now, this film is going to get bad.
Implode? Yeah.
And it didn't.
No.
It wobbled a little towards the end. One of my gripes with the film is Franco's boss. He was a little too stereotypically like money hungry, like go, 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 go. Oh, no, don't go, don't go. Oh, but money? Yes, let's do it. Let's do it. That was a little too much. Why on earth would he end up in a helicopter at the end with the cops? Made no sense in terms of...
Well, supposedly he could identify Caesar.
Like,
Seriously?
The cops would never let him get anywhere near that.
This was a film that completely came out of left field for me. A lot of times when you have these big, huge blockbuster possible potential franchises, you're hearing about it sometimes like 3 or 4 years before it actually happens. And now you're talking about the internet age. I didn't hear a peep about this movie until about a year ago.
Yeah, you're right.
And I heard...
It went under the radar.
It went under the radar, and James Franco's in it. That's okay, whatever. And because the Tim Burton version was kind of a disaster, I think it had left a bad taste in people's mouths, and I don't think anybody was that interested. In a summer that was so crowded with blockbusters, they timed it perfectly by making it the last one to come out. I mean, you have a few more, Fright Night and whatever else coming out, but this was the last of the potential blockbusters to come out.
Well, it's a strategy now. What you do is you wait till August, and then you release the things that you're cautious about.
Yes.
The thing that you don't think it's ever going to be a mega blockbuster, you save it. This way it can breathe a little.
Right. Which was a perfect strategy because the movie is a huge hit and is grossing money hand over fist. Whereas if you had put it out in June or July, I mean, Transformers or Harry Potter might have just trampled it.
It would have gotten eaten
superhero
alive.
movies, yeah.
Now, another thing that I was hoping they would go into a little, or they would use as the motivation for Caesar's actions, is I don't think Caesar ever finds out directly from Franco's character that his father died.
John Lithgow
died.
Yeah, I think
they
you're
never
right.
kind of, because I remember there's a scene where Caesar's talking about what happened to his mother, and Franco's trying to explain to his mother's dead.
Mother's dead, right.
And he's very sad about it, and you figure that he would try to make a connection at some point where
like my father's dead.
My father's dead, they're together now, so make the connection. Don't go completely bad
Right.
shit. But they never use that. And I think you get to a point in the film where, which might be, in a way, it is kind of like the original. Caesar has a connection with the scientist.
Yes.
He likes him. He saves him. I mean, he
Yes.
could have gotten completely trampled by the rioting
Right.
apes. It's enough to save him, but it's not enough to do what he says. He gets to a certain point in the bridge and in the jungle even, where it's like, no,
yeah.
I got to do this now. You go back to whatever you're doing, and
Right.
I'll see you later.
Maybe we'll meet up again sometime. Well, you know, the thing is, too, the film, it could have really, I mean, yes, there are human deaths in the film. It's not the bloodbath that it could have been. Caesar is showing some restraint.
Yes.
And I think that's also a throwback to the original in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Originally at the end, now this got a little tinkered with. Originally at the end, they were going to kill the administrator, governor, whatever you want to call him. And he did get killed. They did get beaten to death. But they tweaked the ending before it was released theatrically. And Caesar stopped them and kind of said, well, we're more evolved than you. And he had this big speech at the end, you know, so they're going to that, I think, you know, hearkening back to that with saying, you know, they're better than us. He has a more evolved sensibility than humans do, that these apes, these smart apes have, you know, I saw that anyway.
Well, they played with that. What happened with the original ape films, they got darker and darker and darker and darker. And by the time they got to the final film, they said, which it's a pretty horrible film,
It's
but
awful, yeah.
they said to themselves, we went way too dark. We got to kind of rein it back in again.
Yeah.
And they invented a situation where humans and apes are kind of coexisting. But granted, this is way before what ends up happening in the first film. So there's a period.
Well, and you know, you got to ask yourself, somebody like us who's always concerned about timelines. You know, if that's the case, you're striking out into an alternate timeline, because then you're saying that the first film doesn't happen.
No,
because
I think what they're saying is that, but again, it's because of the writing. It's because they wanted a happy ending to the whole franchise.
Right.
They threw this thing where it's like, we're all friends now, and then it's like, or are we all friends? You know, and that's, I think,
so
what's
the
supposed
first
to
one
happen.
could happen.
I think they were saying something, it's like 700 years after
Yeah.
Caesar. So 700 years, okay, that's fine, because the Charlton Heston timeline will not happen for a couple of other thousand years or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, everything could go to hell, you know, in the future,
Right.
which is their way out. Now, for this film, I don't understand how far, you said they wanted to make a trilogy. I don't know how far they want to go with this. I mean, you're talking about the apes becoming smart and humanity starting to shrink by the time you're over with this film.
Right.
Second film, what are we theorizing? A takeover? An actual takeover? An actual battle? Human forces
Does it have
versus
to be a
apes?
battle? Do the humans just die out? There's so few of them that the apes naturally take over because they're so intelligent.
Yeah, but I don't... You have
need
to,
some kind of conflict.
But that's the thing. You need a conflict. You need action.
Yeah.
And action is war. So, human forces are reduced enough for the apes to have a bigger force, so they can kind of actually have a somewhat of a battle. And then by the time you get to number 3, it's like you're in the first film. Now you're in the Planet of the Apes. The Icarus lands.
Right. How far ahead do you jump? You know, if you had 5 films in the first series that came out one after another after another. You know, I don't know if they want to do that. If they want to go 20 years for the sequel, do they want to go 100 years? You know, I don't know. It's hard for me to see how they're going to map it out.
It's also tough because this is a contemporary movie. You're not dealing in the future in terms of future sets and futuristic looking things, or even devastated
Which I'm sure
post-apocalyptic
kept costs
things
down
right.
to a certain extent.
But this is how they wanted to tell this story.
Yeah.
Even the original story, as far as timeline. Now again, this is something that we always get in trouble for. The original story, we think there's a timeline to it, and the timeline is determined by whoever makes the next movie. Right. So in other words, you have the original film.
Yeah.
The film starts here. The film ends here. The second film kind of continues that. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Doesn't mess with the timeline too much. Okay, now you get to the third film. Monkeys go back in time. It's like, oh crap. Here we go. Paradox time.
Right.
Who originated this? The monkeys going back in
chicken or the
time?
egg?
Was it the monkeys who just went back in time? Or was there another incident
Right.
that happened, a nuclear war amongst humans that triggered this whole mess? And then you have alternate universes. Right. So,
well, it's people like us who get crazy over this stuff. You know, because of the fact that they nodded and winked to the original Heston one, we're saying to ourselves, we're like, how can we resolve all this? How can we resolve the Heston movies with the Roddy McDowall Conquest with this movie?
I don't consider this movie to be a sequel or a prequel. This is a remake or
Yeah.
a reboot or a retool
Whatever.
or a whatever. They're redoing it, period, because you cannot interweave this anywhere.
Yeah,
the
I
characters already exist. You can't have two Caesars running around this
Right.
world. No. I'm more upset about the original. It's kind of like I'm going back to the original in terms of saying the timelines don't work. You create a paradox, you screw things up. The second somebody messes around with time travel,
right.
they blow up the story because
Sure.
it starts to get full of holes. So in this particular story, I think what's happening is they're telling us from the beginning, this is how it all starts. There is not going to be a time travel scene, hopefully, in the future films, if there are future films, where it'll be like, oh my God, it's so mind-boggling. They're blowing my mind how they're going back in time
Well,
and
I think
making it ironic.
Now, I know when you guys discussed the Tim Burton film in the prior podcast, there was some respect for what he had done. I think he confused the hell out of everybody when he did that. It took me 3 or 4 viewings for me to understand what the hell the end of that story meant. And now I think I'm clear. That's what happens when you start with these paradoxes, and it's like, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
One of the things about the Tim Burton film that we talked about was that, yes, in a way, the ending, it is truer to the book's ending. It has the twist. It's a different twist.
Right.
It's not the Statue of Liberty twist.
Right.
It's a different twist that completely screws with your mind.
Right.
But in this film, like I said, if they're establishing the rules from the beginning that we are giving you the past so you don't get confused later. This is going to be in order, hopefully. Like I said, hopefully we won't get to film number 2 or film number 3 and have a time travel aspect to it.
You know, back in the 70s, I think you could get away with audiences sucking up the whole idea of Cornelius and Zira building or refitting Heston's ship and traveling back through time, and the world explodes,
And that helps, it projects it, yeah.
You know, like
It's the lightning. It's the lightning in Back to the Future.
Yeah, I think audiences today are a little bit more evolved and wouldn't accept that. You know, okay, science fiction is a little ridiculous at times, but
yeah, but I mean, I'm not even arguing something like that. That is just that's something that you either go with it or you don't go with it.
Right.
My whole point is, from a writing perspective, okay, what is the beginning? Is this the beginning of history, or is this the beginning of history?
I hope it
Or are
is.
you purposely creating two histories? Are you doing that on purpose?
I hope that wherever they go with this franchise, I do hope there's no time travel involved. I really don't see the need.
If the astronauts arrive and they look young, that's okay, because it's part of the whole thing about traveling at light speed.
Yes.
You don't age as fast as everybody
Right.
else. That works. You don't
Right.
have to do a time travel trick.
Right.
But it would be nice if you moved from here to a second story,
Right.
to a third stories. Because, yeah, those original films, if you think about it, if you really think about it, there's probably only 2 or 3 stories to tell, not 5.
Right. Absolutely.
The first 2 films are kind of like one film.
Yes.
The second 2 films
They're kinda like
are
one
one film. The fifth film tries to
The
tie
fifth-
things
yeah,
together,
doesn't need to exist.
tries to tie everything, and it screws it up.
Yes.
So you could theoretically do it in 2 or 3 films.
I don't think you need more than 3 films for this franchise. Another question, too, becomes, you know, the fact that, you know, and you guys touched on this in the other podcast. In the book, the original Planet of the Apes book, the Ape Society was more of a contemporary,
Modern,
future,
yes.
modern society. But it was a convention, I think, of the budget of the first film to make
Couldn't do it.
to make what they did, to make them look like they're living in caves and all that crap. But I think as this franchise goes forward, I don't think, because we're not going to use the whole nuclear war thing and blow up the planet and make everything. You're going to use this disease to render. So why can't you just, you know,
Leave everything.
yeah, and the future becomes, you know, whatever advances happen, the apes will make, but it won't look like the Heston Planet of the Apes.
Right.
It'll be truer to the, and even the Burton Planet of the Apes, make it look like the book.
Well, that's one of the things that I was confused about, and I don't know if I really got a straight answer about. Is it that in the original films, the apes look the way they look because that's the only way to get a person to act in an ape suit?
Yeah, right.
So, in other words, in theory, are the apes supposed to look like today's apes? It's just that you couldn't get acting out of
I
that.
think so.
So they're not supposed to walk upright and be wearing, you know,
Yeah.
be behaving in this, looking in this fashion.
Or was that just
Evolution.
thousands of years? Well, you know,
Well,
in
it's not-
reality, you would say millions of years. But,
Right, but it doesn't make sense because evolution would take way longer.
it would take way longer
to be.
But is that just something you suspend disbelief for and say, all right, you know, this is what happens if they were left to, you know, if they had intelligence and they
Yeah.
were standing upright and blah blah blah.
So in other words, if like I said before, if we are dealing with this film and there's a third film made, and we are dealing in Planet of the Apes, are we going to be looking at chimps the way they looked in the first film, except they're going to be wearing suits? Or are we
Possibly.
looking at a more evolved, upright human kind of chimp?
I'm pretty sure. Again, we keep saying this, CGI evolves and evolves and evolves, but it never becomes perfect. I would tend to believe that if we get to that point, what we're doing is CGI over motion capture. That you have somebody like Andy Serkis and maybe other actors. I mean, you look at Avatar. You have actors doing their roles against green screen and against nothing, and then the computer guys do their thing. There's a certain somewhat realistic quality to the motion capture. When you have something like the Star Wars prequels, there is something that is just so completely artificial about those, even though there's, oh, wow, it's amazing, but when you have somebody like Andy Serkis doing Gollum, there is a certain naturalism, realism associated with the
more human or the more familiar, the more of a connection you make if they can make it look good.
Right.
I mean, take Iron Man. Iron Man, there's a lot of CGI of Iron Man.
Yeah.
It's not a human-looking person. It's a robotic-looking person. He moves perfectly. He acts perfectly.
Right.
But you don't get emotion out of a mechanical-looking character.
Right.
On the other hand, you have somebody like one of these apes, like Caesar, who's like, you could see a lot. And granted,
the eyes
they did a lot more because it's him.
Yeah.
And there, you see a lot of emotion on this character.
It was like tugging at you.
Yeah.
I mean, the performance, you get lost in it. The best CGI is when you forget.
Yep.
When you're not like, oh, yeah. Which is kind of how I felt during Avatar, even though it was impressive, and I mean, more than impressive. But this film, I thought, took another step forward.
Yep, definitely. The other thing I was wondering about it is there's a scene where you see all these chimps climbing the hills.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, there's like hundreds of chimps here. There weren't that many in that
they
shelter.
freed them from the
went
zoo.
To the zoo. So are we supposed to believe that it's a combination of those two?
Yeah, I think so.
Because to me, they look like a little too inflated. Like it was like a.
Well, I think that's why they had that little insert to go to the zoo.
To up the numbers a little bit.
And think about it, how many chimps really could there be in the zoo? But whatever.
That's the,
are they going to go from zoo to zoo to
that's
zoo?
The thing. Maybe they stopped at 5 or 6 different zoos before they got to that
point.
point.
And then finally, one of these chimps is going to be smart enough to take a boat to South America or Africa or something and find more
and
to
get 100,000 more chimps.
Yeah, that's the thing. Or is they just start breeding?
Well, I mean, between breeding and freeing zoos and going to jungles,
right.
I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, this wraps it up for our little review of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I'd like to thank Steve for joining us once again. Thank you, Steve.
My pleasure.
And we will see you guys next time here on Geekfest Rants. Stop.